and I'm also a member of the board of directors. I'm joined today by a couple of fellow board members and a wonderful panel to talk about this topic. You're going to see them pop up on your screen here in a second, and we'll have them introduce themselves in the order that they show up on the screen. So I believe we're going to start with Shannon first.
Again, hello all. My name is Shannon Lynn Burton, and I am the Associate University Ombudsperson at Michigan State University, and I am also a member of the Board of Directors.
Brody, I think you're next up.
Good afternoon. I'm Brody Broshears. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Academic Success at the University of Southern Indiana and also a board member.
And Wendy?
And I'm Wendy Troxel, Director of the NACADA Center for Research at Kansas State, also on the faculty at Kansas State University.
And Sarah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Champlin-Scharf. I work at Harvard University. I'm the outgoing chair of the research committee and former commission chair for the Theory and Philosophy Commission, and soon to be something else.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. David?
Hello all, I'm David Gray. I'm an educational developer at York St John University in the UK and a member of the research committee.
Excellent. And Drew?
Hello, I'm Drew Piraway. I'm at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm the incoming chair of the research committee.
Excellent. All right, so we will hear from all of those folks over the course of our next hour here. So we do have an agenda today. After we get through the introductions here, Brody's going to take you through an explanation of the format, and we'll give you a brief overview of the topic at hand, and then we're going to turn it over to our panel, where they'll provide a brief presentation. They're going to share their perspectives on the topic from their vantage point, and then we're going to get to your questions and comments. Just a few logistics for you. If you look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, right below where you're seeing the information, you'll notice there's a Q&A button. That is how you're going to communicate with us. So as they are talking, if you have questions that come to mind, if there are things that you want us to address, please feel free to use that Q&A button to type those questions in there. Shannon's going to be moderating those, and when we get to the back half of the presentation, we're going to engage those questions and rely upon our panelists to provide us some thoughts and feedback. Then we'll have a wrap up and next steps, and wrap up pretty close to the top of the hour there. One other thing logistically, you may have noticed that there was an event website, and you'll see a screenshot showing up on your screen right now. I just want to draw your attention both to the URL down at the bottom of that. That is the event webpage. And then the highlighted section, there is a Google form that we put together where you can, we ask some additional questions and you can provide additional feedback on the topic. So after the session today, if you're reflecting on what you heard and you wanted to throw some additional input in there or additional questions, please feel free to use that form. We're going to have that up until the end of May. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Brody.
Thanks, Carrie. The town hall really is an opportunity to discuss a framework for engaging and advancing research in academic advising. This is our fourth virtual town hall. We're very excited today to be talking about this topic in particular. We want to always talk about learning outcomes when we think about the virtual town hall, and we really have three things that we want to chat about today. We want to give you an opportunity to hear a recap of the conversation at the town hall in St. Louis about the NACADA Center for Research at Kansas State University. You're going to also hear those perspectives on this topic from our current NACADA leaders, that group of experts that we've got with us today from the research committee and from the Center for Research. And then you're going to get that opportunity to provide us with questions using the Zoom question and answer function, and maybe provide comments and suggestions related to NACADA's research framework and opportunities. So NACADA's strategic goals were approved by the board of directors in September of 2017. NACADA's research framework impacts all of the strategic goals, but when we think about the potential greatest impact on the association, and for today's purposes, let's focus on strategic goals 1, 2, and 3. Strategic goal 1 is expand and communicate the scholarship of academic advising. And here we want to ask maybe the question, how do we engage members, both consumers and producers of advising research? And involvement in the research framework that was developed by the Research Committee and the NACADA Center for Research, I think is a great way to start having that conversation. Strategic goal 2 is provide professional development opportunities that are responsive to the needs of advisors and advising administrators. And the question I think we talk about here is, are there gaps or needs that the research framework may be able to assist us with in regards to the professional development of the association? And strategic goal 3 is promote the role of effective academic advising in student success to college and university decision makers. And in this goal, the question related to research that I think we want to answer is, how do we effectively utilize, share, and produce research that we can use to promote the effective role of academic advising to folks who help make decisions related to advising and to our membership across the globe. So in terms of the St. Louis summary, let's talk about some of the highlights and themes that were captured at the town hall meeting this fall at the 2017 annual conference. First, there was discussion about how the NACADA Center for Research, the new NACADA Center for Research, will interface and interact with the currently developed already NACADA Research Committee and the advising communities, which were formerly known as the Commission and Interest Groups. We also talked about research-related professional development and writer resource mentoring and the support that may emanate now from the NACADA Center for Research and the NACADA Research Committee. And then finally, we discussed ways in which we might be able to build community around research and ways to inspire scholarship to benefit the diversity of our membership. Wendy, in some of our conversations prior to this, we've really been talking about the demystification of research and the idea that members fall along a continuum in terms of their comfortability with relation to research. Speaking of Wendy, at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our new director for the NACADA Center for Research, Wendy Troxel.
Thanks, Brody, and welcome everyone. Excited as usual to talk about this topic, and boy, we could launch in all kinds of different directions related to this, and we will in the weeks and months and years to come. But today we want to focus on just a few of these issues, especially related to the continuum Brody mentioned, so that we can get to your questions, because that's really the beautiful format of this. You know, it was only over about 10 years ago when President at the time, Jenny Bloom, formed a task force called Infusing Research into Advising, and they had the charge of coming up with a definition of research and the scope and purpose of the work within academic advising contexts. And they made the clear point that being involved somehow with the literature that underpins our work is the collective responsibility of the advising community. And then, as Brody mentioned, they really appropriately distinguished between consuming research and producing research, and a lot has happened over the years. The work of the NACADA Research Committee has been dynamic and active, and now that we've opened the new NACADA Center for Research, we can move forward blasting forward together for sure. So what does this look like in terms of a continuum between consuming research and producing research? We're exploring more formally the concept of scholarly advising as opposed to or related to the scholarship of advising. So here's what this looks like in this framework. And some of you were at the region sessions, not this spring, but last spring when we were playing this out and have been talking about it a lot over the last year or so. We borrowed and really adapted this framework actually from the dietetics literature. There's some really good research discussion in the dietetics literature about involvement, kind of practitioner-oriented involvement in research. And I'm happy, by the way, to send those complete citations to you in APA style. So the first two levels, there's a 4-level framework, kind of a pyramid, and we'll get briefly to the third and fourth letter, but we're really interested in the first two levels of this framework and how they directly relate together toward becoming a profession. Well, it's a debate for another day, of course. So this level 1 has to do with consuming the research related to the field. We're calling this scholarly advising. And the idea for the framework is that you should be able, each of us should be able to note on this continuum where you are at this moment and where you'd like to be. We think this is linear. We think you have to be at these 1.1 before you can be at 1.2 and 1.3 and so on. So I'm going to run really briefly through these so we can get to the others and then have some good discussion about it. So for now, and this is still in a working form, these terminologies that we use, which may be a little bit loaded in some cases, but for right now, we're calling level 1 professional commitment. And this is kind of a dispositional issue as well as a participatory issue. So 1.1 is, I agree, as a primary role advisor, as a faculty advisor, I agree that evidence performs practice, that there is a scholarly literature base that I can access to use to inform the work that we do. And so level 1.1 is simply as an acknowledgement that there is a growing literature base that's important as we think about the work that we do. 1.2 then is actually, not only is there a literature base, but I've read some stuff once in a while. I've either participated in a common reading, I've read an article in the NACADA Journal or some other publication that's related to that, and I've consulted some of the resources that are available to me. Next step then is not only have I read them, but I've actually used some things that I've learned once in a while in the work that I do, and I am becoming a reflective practitioner, using the literature to inform the strategies that I take with students or whatever context you're in. And then 1.4 is kind of the tipping point from the consuming to producing research. And let me point out at this point, this is just kind of my opinion. You can be at 1.3, for example, and be considered a scholar. I really believe this. If you are using the literature, you understand the theoretical underpinnings of the work, and you apply it to the work that you do, then I would call you a scholar practitioner. You may not have to be actively involved in the research. We hope you are at some point, but this is a pretty important level. So I don't want to diminish the importance of being a scholarly advisor at this level. So 1.4 is kind of as we head into more active involvement. So level 2 then is we're calling the scholarship of advising. And this is active involvement. Level 2.1, we've added this level. This is how we've modified this one from the original literature we took this from. And we're calling this kind of an observatory level. And so there are some of you that were graduate students or graduate assistants or undergraduate assistants who were involved in some kind, it doesn't have to be an advising related research project, any kind of systematic inquiry that you were able to observe from the inside and see how that process worked. So that's an important level I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. 2.2 is that you have an idea for some kind of an analysis or some kind of study that could be done. I'm going to talk about that, and when we start to talk about our writing groups. 2.3.1 is that I've actually written up that idea into some formal proposal or perspectives for a social science study or some kind of framework for a theoretical or philosophical analysis for a humanities based inquiry. But you've actually written it down or typed it out. You don't just have the idea in your head, you're actually formally doing that. And then 2.3.2, of course, is that you've actually been involved with a completed analysis or study, and you're ready for the next one, perhaps in a different context. So this is really the framework. The levels 3 and 4 have to do with leading research, and we're going to be looking for those who could lead large-scale research projects and lead research teams to help get us through that process. We partner with a lot of other organizations already in the scholarship that they're doing related to student success, but it's going to be really important really quickly for us to generate original research out of the center and get as much of a broad and deep scholarly context as we can. So I'm going to stop there. And so as you think about as the others talk, the idea again is, where are you now? Where you want to be? How can we help you get there? And the research committee is incredibly involved in that. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Hey everyone. So what I wanted to do is just sort of give you a brief overview of what the research committee is charged with doing, what we do, what we're hoping to do in the future, and Drew will obviously talk more about what we hope for the future, and then we'll also talk to David about the UCAT approach, which is the UK. So the research committee. I've just chosen kind of a few examples here. There are opportunities for research grants. The committee reviews and awards research grants twice a year. Part of the process and what we hope to do is not only allow people to get money to do their research, but also it gives us an opportunity to provide feedback and guidance about the proposals that we receive. So we try and offer suggestions for literature review, how one might frame a research question, suggested methodological approaches, for example, and this takes place in November and March. We also have we review surveys. So a number of researchers will often be interested in giving a survey to our membership. And so the research committee will review those twice a year. Again, their period of time between January 15th and March 15th and July 15th to September 15th. We'll review them to make sure that they're sound and offer suggestions for how they might reframe some things, maybe suggestions for follow-up with some qualitative study as well. And we also try and find a way to connect people at the annual conference. So we started offering a common reading once a year at the annual, and we're hoping this year we actually have. Thank you to the EO. We've got a large room that we can use for different reasons, different purposes, to try and get some researchers together in one room. So maybe we'll do some roundtable sessions, have some people kind of talking over similar project types, or it may be that there's kind of a way for people to kind of walk in and walk out, be able to talk to people that are in a room about ideas that they might have for research. This year we've also tried to offer some consulting sessions at a number of the regional conferences. So that was kind of an experiment that we're still doing. The regional conferences are still taking place, so we'll see how that goes. And we'll love to get feedback from people about what they think. In partnership with the new research center, we're trying to put together some 15-minute modules to help people with certain aspects of research. So there was first one just launched. Peter Hagen did one on humanities research. We have hopes of doing ones on things like qualitative design, scholarly writing, quantitative tools and techniques, research ethics. These are some ideas that we will hope to put together in the future. We also, think of ourselves as here to find ways to help promote, support, and facilitate the consumption and the production of research within the field. So this year we've been trying to meet every so often to think through ways to mentor incipient projects and new researchers, and try and make sure we're finding ways to support both new researchers and researchers that have been doing this for a while. So that's the research committee kind of in a nutshell. And to give you a kind of more global perspective, David Gray, who is a current member of the committee and also on the UK's UCAT, can help us with, let us know what they're up to.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, as Sarah said, I'm speaking on behalf of the UK tonight. I don't often get the chance to speak on behalf of the entire nation, so I'm going to make the most of it. No, actually, I'm speaking on behalf of UCAT, largely, which is the UK Advising and Tutoring Association. You may not have heard of UCAT, but we're the first allied association of NACADA outside of the US. We're quite a young organisation. We've been going for 4 years now. To give you the sort of context behind the UK, the higher education context in the UK is slightly different to the US. Most of our advisors are in fact faculty advisors, and it really is for many people a secondary part of their role. It's not something that's rewarded or recognised in what they do. It's not prioritised by the institution, really, so it does take second place a lot of the time, and for that reason many advisors are not really reflective practitioners, and they don't really engage with the scholarship of advising. The other challenge we face in the UK is there very limited research and evidence base around advising. I think if you look over the last sort of 20, 25 years, there may have been maybe 2 or 3 books published around advising, and on average 1 to 2 peer-reviewed publications each year. So there's really not an awful lot of research out there, but our administration want evidence of impact. They want evidence of impactful practices that they can encourage advisors to employ within the institutions. So because most of our members are faculty, about 95% of our members in UCAT are faculty, many of them are often researchers themselves, but they may not be confident in advising research because it's outside of their disciplinary area, or they may not be supported by their institutions to actually engage in non-disciplinary research. So that's a particular issue that UCAT wanted to challenge, really, to approach. So the NACADA research framework that Wendy mentioned has been really helpful to us. We see that as a really useful way of promoting that reflective and scholarly approach to advising practice, but also as a way to enhance research and build that evidence base here in the UK. So it's guiding our thinking in 2 ways, really, and it falls in with the levels that Wendy's talked about, the consumption and the production of research. So from the consumption side, that really is starting to influence how our professional development committee think about the kind of professional development opportunities that we might give to our members. And I'll be honest and say that actually perhaps that's part of the organisation that we haven't quite developed as richly as the research side and the production side, but it's definitely there and on the way. But as far as the production of research goes, that is something that we've really taken forward. So UCAT as an organisation wants to promote research into advising in the UK and really build UK research capacity. And to do that, we started a research mentoring programme to support a small cohort of advisors to take them through the entire research process, from the very initial idea through designing a research study to conducting that research study, all the way through to the publication of the research results. So that's all of those levels on Wendy's second slide there. And we've done that by involving people in various different activities. It runs over about 14 months. And through that time, we have regular research retreats where we get people together to support one another in their research. We've had online support mechanisms and webinars. And the first cohort that's gone through this process is coming to the end of conducting their research studies. And we're going to be moving into a period of having writing retreats now to support them through to publication. So we think this has been a really useful approach, and I think NACADA likes this approach and is thinking about how it might do something similar. And we're borrowing from NACADA as well. Now UCAT has some funds behind it. We've been raising some income. We're going to consider adopting the NACADA practice of offering small grants as sort of pump priming to support more strategic advising research projects. So I'd like to finish off by just saying a little bit about the research trends that are emerging here in the UK. And there are some listed on the slide there. The first two around the models of advising and technology and big data. I think from the conversations we have with colleagues around the UK, those are really the emerging research areas for the UK. But some of the others are the last four that are listed there, and those are examples of projects that are being supported through our mentoring process at the moment. So we're looking there at issues around reward and recognition for advising and what impact that might have, the assessment of advising, which is something that doesn't really happen here in the UK at the moment, issues of matching students to advisors to better build and support that relationship between the student and advisor. And another one that's going to be really important for the UK over the next 2 or 3 years because of government initiatives is how advisors can actually support alumni. So supporting students as they leave the university and then go forward into whatever comes next for them. And with that, I think it's time for me to pass it over to Drew.
Thank you, David. Firstly, I want to express gratitude for the folks on the research committee. It's just a very intelligent and engaging and hardworking bunch of folks. And an especially big thank you to Sarah Champlin-Sharp for great and steady leadership of the committee these last 3 years. And I think just as I'm the incoming chair, I'm just grateful for the place that we're already in, and the research committee has a standing agenda of, I think, really important work that needs to continue. I also want to express great appreciation for Wendy and the intentionality she's had about bringing in voices that in finding sort of the right balance and points of connection between the committee and the center. And that sort of leads to my first bullet point here, which is that I think that's an ongoing process, and it's one that is just kind of full of possibilities for making a strong practitioner scholar as well as scholar practitioner base. And I think we're building on that sort of strength as an emerging profession, and I look forward to continuing that close work with Wendy. Part of what I see as a real strength for the advising community is a continued framing of research in terms of scholarly inquiry, that it's inclusive of many methods and canons and bodies of literature, and that we welcome, we all come from varied academic backgrounds that we can draw upon, and that's a real strength. So in a couple of research projects where I've studied advisors, how we come to the profession and develop, I think there's just this breadth of disciplinarity that's something to just kind of, I think, keep fostering and thinking about. So this includes education and social sciences and humanities-based critical inquiry, and Sarah's leadership has done really well at discussing that breadth of inquiry, and I look forward to continuing that and fostering that. And then I think continuing to bring opportunities to support and celebrate research to the regions is something I also would like to see. Continuing the consulting sessions that Sarah mentioned. We recently discussed bringing the research symposium back to the regions. It had been kind of on a rotation, and getting it back to that is something that should be coming along. I hope to develop an idea that we started talking about in St. Louis to do something like the Best of Region type award for a concurrent session, but focused on original research on the regional level that we would then bring to annual. And I also would want to continue to get varied and strong representation from all the regions on the research committee. I think there might be 1 or 2 regions that aren't so well represented at the moment. And lastly, I think that getting advising literature in the hands of advisors and trying to move barriers has always been important work for the committee. And I think there's a lot of energy right now to be harnessed around creating a deep well of that literature that's easy for advisors to access. David is working on that with UCAT, and I think we learn a lot from each other in that endeavor. And Wendy and David, along with a couple other scholars, are doing a content analysis of 15 years of English language research on advising that I'm excited to read and to have as a resource. The theory, philosophy, and history advising community has also talked a little bit about organizing something like an annotated bibliography that's sort of centralized and easily accessible. So I think that resources for research exist, and they have existed, but I think that there's good energy around sort of a centralization and making those more, or building awareness of them in any case. And it's just an exciting time to be in the work of advising scholarship. And as we get to the town hall part here, I welcome hearing from anyone and everyone in NACADA about what would keep them engaged in that scholarship on any level. And so I'll turn it back to Wendy before we get to that conversation.
Thanks. Yeah. I wanted to just touch on some of this professional development that both Sarah and Drew mentioned. And David, I would argue you're doing a lot of professional development with your group. So we're certainly, we can take cohorts through the whole process at some point. It's amazing work that the UCAT group is doing to jumpstart all of that. And then there's also this kind of big umbrella just-in-time professional development that our members specifically have asked for, and we need to respond to. That's a wonderful thing. So first of all, Drew touched on the access to sources. One of the things that we're doing, you're going to see some all-member emails soon about this process, where we want to hear about the articles that you're reading from outside the NACADA publication venues, for example, that are related to advising. There's a lot going on in the different disciplinary pedagogical journals, as well as other across our global community. So we're gonna have a place, there is one now, but we're gonna advertise this, a place to get your annotations for those. So you've read something interesting, others ought to too. Let's get that out and kind of start a list going. We're also going to start an article critique, kind of like a book review that NACADA does, but an article review, and actually engage more deeply with that. And then the research skills and tips section is up and running on the website. If you go to Research Center, Research Skills and Tips, we've launched our first video, as Sarah mentioned. Peter Hagen's. This is just a little 15-minute overview of humanities-based research. And then we've got a whole series that we're starting to recruit for and produce that should be really fun to see, along with some sample articles, for example. Sarah mentioned the research room at the annual conference in Phoenix, and that'll be the convention center is set up with north rooms and a north section and a west section. So the N or a W at the beginning is that determination, and that room will be W101C, and lots more coming about the activities that are going to take place in that space. Down the line, looking at e-tutorials, the amazing team that's already up and running with e-tutorials available for other topics. We're in discussion now about what that looks like from a research standpoint. Those are virtual, and then as both Sarah and Drew mentioned, the research symposium. What does that look like to get a group in a room face-to-face and kind of work through a process? Really also excited to announce the virtual writing groups are now being formed. You'll see an all-member email out about that this week, but the website is open in the same place, Research Center, writer support. Dr. Rhonda Dean Kinsel from Oklahoma is coordinating that process, and we'll have 3 types of writing groups, as many people as we can get, that will start in September. The one type is an idea generation, so that is that level, I don't have them in my head, 1 point something, where I have an idea about something that I just want to kind of play out and talk through with some critical friends. Another type of group is idea development. I've actually started to write it down, and I want to develop it even more. And the third type of writing group is I'm actually working on my manuscript. It's getting closer. I'd like to share it with critical friends. And remember too that this is a peer process. So the real beautiful part of this is that not only are you getting feedback on your topic and ideas, but you're actually learning to be a peer reviewer and give formative feedback to others on their work. So that's a really fun process. And then there will be an opportunity to do a little one-on-one consultation. If you just want to talk something through one time, we'll have opportunity to do that as well. So that's just a little snapshot of the professional development opportunities that we have related to this, but we really want to get to your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Shannon, I believe.
Great, thanks, Wendy. So we're now going to open the discussion portion of our virtual town hall today. In order for this to move smoothly, a few housekeeping notes. First, as our panelists respond individually, there may be a bit of back and forth as Zoom switches between them on the screen. We apologize in advance for any inconvenience that this might create. Second, please enter any questions that you have into the question box on Zoom. I will be moderating and opening them to our panelists. A few things to note about this format. In some cases, we may collate similar questions into a single reframed question for our panelists. Also, we may not get to your specific question today, but please know that the board and the executive office are committed to respond to every question or comment. You'll note on the event page on the NACADA website where you can find the archived recording of the previous town halls, and they also include a link to the PDF of the responses to the questions raised at those town halls. Third, questions and responses will continue until the final 5 minutes of the scheduled time. And finally, for those who have questions but do not feel comfortable having them answered live, all attendees have been provided a link to a Google form to provide further feedback. Please note that you do not need to have a Google account to enter responses into this form. Okay, so with that, let me start with our first question. One of our attendees wanted to know if we could talk a little bit more about the tension in the framework between it being arranged very deductively and the fact that science is more inductive in nature. Wendy, would you like to take this one?
Oh, let's see. Inductive versus deductive. Well, just the framework is an involvement framework. It's not an inquiry framework. So the involvement has to do with actually actively being involved in this work. There was a piece of that question that had to do with kind of an advisor's decision to use something they've read. And I would say that we are certainly that's a simple looking thing on paper and a very complex thing in practice. So making that decision to use something you've learned is certainly an area of inquiry in itself. Science being inductive or deductive kind of depends on the frame. Qualitative research is inductive. Quantitative research is deductive. Philosophical analysis is complex altogether. With regard to practitioners, I view it kind of the pedagogy of advising, kind of like acting. Actors who come into a formal acting program know how to act. They know what it means to be an actor and to play a role. But picking that apart and determining what are the conventions for that, what is the pedagogy for that, what is the structure for that, is a kind of a different flip. So you can put things together and then create a role, but you can also take a role and unpack it from that way. So I would say inductive, deductive is fluid and depends on the lens. So I think I'll stop there, but let's write on that because I like that question.
So I mean, I can just say too that I think I don't think that the implication is that there's one correct way and that this needs to be done using the scientific method. I think it depends on what it is we're trying to understand. And I notice in the follow-up question, it's sort of similar question about evidence-based practice as opposed to authority-based practice. I may be misunderstanding that, but it seems to me it's getting at the idea of are we emphasizing a social science approach versus a humanities approach? And I think that the answer is yes, depending on what you're looking at. So if you're trying to answer, or identify what the theory of advising should be, then you may be better served, using a humanities-based lens, thinking about it philosophically. And in that sense, you'd be thinking of it as sort of authority-based practice. If you're trying to figure out whether certain practices are influencing a particular outcome for your students, you might be better served to use a social science approach. Or you may want to use both. You may take the humanities theoretical approach to help you figure out how to, use to determine which sort of, social scientific methodological approach you want to take. So I think that that we can use both here, and that we want to support both kinds of ways of thinking about things.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We have an attendee who is excited about getting involved with the research committee. Could we have many of you, talk about how to get involved with the research committee, as well as how you might get involved in research projects coming out of NACADA if you don't have much experience yet?
So I can just say, if you want to get involved with the research committee, one of the things that we often suggest is that if you're going to the annual conference, that you come to the research committee meeting, which, if I remember correctly, is at 10 a.m. on Sunday. So right during pre-conference session time, we welcome anybody to come and join and see what we do, and contribute as much as you want. Your voice is you're welcome to speak at these meetings. The other thing is that once you've done that, if you think that you may still be interested, you could reach out to me or to Drew. Drew will be starting his term at the end of the annual conference, and we can talk about ways that you might, kind of test the waters and maybe get involved on a subcommittee, or offer some help in some other way.
And it is a committee that does a lot of work. So those subcommittee things, there's plenty to do. So we welcome you.
That is for sure. And specifically, that committee meeting is at 10:15 on Sunday in North 227A. Come on and join us. Yeah, getting involved in projects. So the comment about how do I get involved if I don't have a lot of experience, and then I'll address that if I do. That 2.1, that observational level, is the perfect opportunity. What we're going to try to do as we launch formal research projects that come out of the center is to always build in some kind of, I'm not sure we're going to call it yet, like research apprentice or something, like, I don't know, research assistant certainly, but in a kind of an apprentice capacity. So there will always be spots on research projects for those who want to see the study done from the inside. So that is really exciting. How do you get involved if you have a lot of experience? We're the advisory group for the research center is talking now about kind of an RFP process for what projects do we launch, how do we support the project. The research center staff is very small, so the work needs to be done by scholars and researchers out in the field with our support. And so we're really trying to, with this first launch, be kind of pretty be able to have our arms around it, but yet have a good balance of approaches to inquiry in this first round. So we'll have positions for, right now we're going to call him a research fellow who oversees a project, runs a research team on some specific large-scale social science project in this case, and then what that looks like for a humanities-based inquiry we're working on as well. So shoot me an email, wgtroxel@ksu.edu, if you want to talk about that, more about that specifically.
Great, thanks, Wendy. David, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more about the amount of interest that you got in your own research mentoring program and how you plan to continue it or grow it moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. That's a great question. So we had 14 people, I think, involved in our first cohort. 2 of them dropped out along the way because of time pressures and because of a lack of institutional support. But UCAT isn't a big organisation, and that represents about 10% of our membership. So I think that was a really good level of involvement for the first time out. We're planning our next cohort, which will start in July. We've already got a couple of people signed up for that one. But I think the real test of how successful this process has been is what that second cohort will be like and how much involvement we get there. And I think that will tell us how likely it is that we can keep it going and grow that. We would like to see it grow, but if we've already hit 10% of our membership, then if we carry on hitting 10% every year, we either need to get lots of new members or we're not going to keep this process going very long. I think in terms of sort of growing the process, we'd like to have that sort of notion of paying it forward. So if we've had somebody involved as a mentee in the process in one cohort, we'd really encourage them to come back and support other people who are then going through the process later on. So we'd like them to act as mentors. I don't think we're going to preclude anybody from being a mentee more than once. We may get some people coming back to do more projects with us. That's great. We're really interested in just growing that research capacity. But I think once we start seeing some publications coming out of the projects we've had through this process, then I think both our members and their institutions will see the value in this process, and that will drive further interest in it.
Great, thanks, David. We have an attendee who's curious about the research, how the Research Center is partnering with and supporting the assessment of advising. So they want to know if there's opportunities and platforms planned to better share and communicate formative advising assessment and program evaluation as well.
I'll jump in on that one. Yeah, that's a tricky one because what's the difference between assessment and research? They both are to be able to just take from a social science perspective here, an evidence-based inquiry is for assessment, you don't need to go through the IRB process to gather data from your students and use it to make program improvements. If you want to write that up and publish it or present on it, then you had to have gone through the human subjects research process on your campus. And quite often in assessment, we don't think of that at the front end. Now, the context and the process that you use to make improvement without using student level, even aggregated data is absolutely publishable and ought to be shared. And so we've just launched the new NACADA Review, Academic Advising Praxis and Perspectives, our new journal, scholarly journal, that is really meant to be pretty very contextual. How did you go about a process methodically to make improvement, for example? And so writing about the process, the critical issues that had to be addressed, what problem were you trying to solve is absolutely publishable. So that would be a fun webinar. The Assessment Institute that we hold every February addresses that very issue as well. So that's a good place for that too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you again, Wendy. What is the best way to float a research idea by the advising community to see if someone at another institution is interested in working together? Especially if you can't get to a conference in the near future.
Shout out to, sorry, you jinxed my mouse there when talking about that earlier. Shout out to our NACADA Nerds Facebook page. If you go to Facebook, and sorry, we're right there right now, some of you don't use Facebook, but that's where we are at the moment, and search for NACADA Nerds. It's a closed group, although it has close to 1,000 members now, and that's where, so you have to answer a couple of questions about your relationship with advising, just because we get a lot of requests for people to join that aren't advisors or related. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, that's a great spot to just float an idea. Just we do that all the time. Just at least as a start, and then we need to get a more formal way to just find the ways to logistically find collaborators on specific research projects. Yeah, we have a listserv, a research listserv. So if you go to that in the NACADA page, believe there's a resources page for listservs. You don't have to be a member of the NACADA Research Committee to be logged in or join the listserv, the research listserv. Just know that those are fun iterative conversations as well.
Great. And tied to this on some level, can you talk a little bit more about how NACADA's focus on research will tie into those individuals who are currently in their doctoral work and kind of writing on topics related to advising?
Yeah, so in terms of anyone of a current doctoral student should join a writing group for sure. Just because you have a dissertation committee doesn't mean you don't want to get extra critical friending going on with that as well. We're also, once you finish, I guess let me just say, we want to know about it. We want to know what research you're working on, and that actually kind of helps us help you find collaborators, or at least interested friends on those topics. So if you're currently working on a topic related to research in your dissertation, let us know. If you're headed for it, let's talk about working through topics. And if you're done with it, we also have a new section on our website called NACADA Scholars. And so we want your complete citation so we can advertise it and share it with others.
Great. So we talked a little bit about the new NACADA review. Can someone talk a little bit more about how this publication is different from Academic Advising Today and the NACADA Journal?
I don't want to take over. I can answer that question, but I want to give other others time to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab at that. I'm on the review board of the journal. I think really the key here is the praxis piece. It's the theory into practice. So it's the relationship between theory and what has actually been done or what could be done, and taking that local practice and putting it into the wider perspective. I think the difference really between the journal and the review is that the journal is really more focused on research. I think the way we described this in an editorial board meeting was, if you've done something that's got surveys in it and it's sort of research focused like that, it's very definitely something that's probably better in the journal and not in the review. And I think the other thing that we're clear about is that articles that are submitted to the journal do require IRB approval, whereas those that are submitted to the review don't necessarily need that.
Yeah, I'm gonna correct you on that one, David. Based on if there is any student level or human level data involved, it will absolutely need to be also IRB approved. Sorry, but the Academic Advising Today is, so that's kind of the difference between popular sources and scholarly sources. So Academic Advising Today is not peer reviewed. It's certainly juried. Others look at it, but it's not a blind process. That is really the key for calling it a scholarly publication, for certainly for promotion and tenure and other reward system kinds of things. So both the NACADA review and the NACADA journal would be termed scholarly because they go through the peer-reviewed double-blind process. But yeah, frankly, we're kind of playing it out. Academic advising today articles are much shorter. They're meant to be read for interest over a lunch hour or a common reading or something, and still has citations. There are still some kind of underpinnings of the literature in there, but much quicker turnaround, much tighter in focus of those. And there are other are there other publications, out? The Mentor is cranked back up. Janet Schulenberg at Penn State and her colleague is relaunching the Mentor, which are other kind of pieces. Indiana has a new journal out, for example. So there's a lot of opportunity for scholarship, and there's going to be some crossover, but hopefully we'll kind of find our lanes on. There shouldn't be competition for good scholarly and important writing.
I think the only thing I was going to add to that, Wendy, is one of the key purposes we've got of the NACADA review is to be developmental of members' writing abilities, which really speaks to what we're talking about tonight and the levels of involvement through the framework. So yes, it's about people writing their stories in a scholarly way, but we want it to be constructively critical. And I think if anybody's interested in writing for the review, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the website, take a look at the rubric that we have for authors. It's the same rubric that's used by reviewers, but it's a really helpful rubric to give you guidance in what those kind of articles should look like, and we really want that feedback process to be very constructive for members to actually help take their writing forward.
Great, thanks so much. So we are down to our last few minutes, so I want to take some time here to thank our panelists for sharing their time and perspectives with us today. I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for coming today and being part of this live town hall webinar. Your input and participation is invaluable to the board of directors as well as our advising community. Very soon you'll receive a link to the recording of this town hall to view again if you choose, as well as share with colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. Our hope is that you continue to reflect and provide additional feedback through the Google form over the next several days. We will close the form on May 30th of this month. The feedback is really vital to us and most welcome. Thanks again for your participation, and I hope that you join us for our next town hall. Thank you.